Hi, my name's Stuart Lynch, and this is the first of two videos where I step you through the ins and outs of the Translation API. There are a number of things added this year at WWDC 24 that will allow us to take advantage of on-device translation in our apps. I'll go through a series of 4 different scenarios, so I hope you stick with me till the end of the second video. I love getting your feedback, so if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment below. Make sure you ring the bell to enable notifications and get notified whenever a new video is released. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. A link is in the description. There is a starter project for this video, and you can download it from the link in the description. There are 3 branches, so make sure you download the starter project branch for this project, as it has the starter resources. Part 1 completed branch contains the completed source code for this video, and will also serve as the starter source code for the final video in this series. You can just download and expand the zipped archive. This project requires Xcode 16, and at the time of this recording, I'm running Xcode Beta 6. There are 4 parts to this project, and we'll be covering 2 parts in each of the 2 videos. In this video, I'll show you what you can do prior to iOS 18. You can enter text in any language and tap on the Translate button, and the iOS will recognize the language that you typed in, so you should not have to change it. But you can change the target language and have the translated text displayed in your view. And you can switch languages at any time. You can also use text-to-speech to read it back to you. In iOS 18, we have much more control. As always, you can type in whatever language you want, and then choose from a range of supported languages before you do the translation. Here, I'll leave the default to English, and it gets the translation correct. If I choose another language, and that language isn't on my device yet, it will download it, and when completed, it proceeds with the translation. And I can even create my own text-to-speech button here.
Guten Tag.
In the second video, we'll look at 2 different ways to do multiple translations at the same time. This does require, however, that all the text that you are translating is the same language, like I have here for my restaurant reviews, which are in German. And then finally, I'm going to borrow some code from another tutorial that allows me to scan and read text from an image in my photo library. Or I'll capture one from my camera and then have it automatically translated for me. So I hope you stick with me. The starter project has 4 tabs to help us get through the videos. There's no real logic code in any of the starter project tabs. It's only UI components so that I can focus on teaching you the ins and outs of the Translation API. With the Translation API, we're able to translate text in our app from one language to another. And this API was available to us after WWDC 23, but there are even more changes and enhancements this year in 2024. I want to start this video by quickly showing you what was introduced last year, and then get to the new translation sessions and tasks that were introduced this year. In the basics view, we have a form with a text field that's bound to a state property called text-to-translate, and it's initialized as an empty string. And there's also a button that will become enabled as soon as we enter some text into the text field. I've also added a focus state and a toolbar button just to help with the dismissal of the keyboard. So to invoke a translation of some text, we must first import translation. We'll also need to provide a Boolean state property that we can toggle, just like we do for a modal sheet. And this will present a translation modal sheet instead. And then we can add an action to the translate button that will toggle this new present translator property. And finally, we can present the translator using the translation presentation method bound to that present translator variable where the text is the text to translate. Well, this even works in the preview. Later on, we'll move to a real device. When we tap on the Translate button for the first time, you will be told that the selected content will be sent to Apple to process, so you must be connected to the internet for this. I've already done that in my preparation, so when I tap the button, I don't see that, but you will. When I do tap the button, I'll find that Apple will recognize the text that I typed in, and in my case, that's English, and then you can choose which language you wish to have it translated to. So in my case, I'm going to choose the defaulted language of French. And then I can tap the play button to play the string,
Salut, comment
or
vas-tu?
I can copy the text translation. Well, let me copy that translation, and I'm going to return to the view. I'll remove the existing string and replace it with what I copied. When I translate, you'll see that the language has been recognized as the one that I had just translated to, which was French, and my target language has now defaulted to English. So if I change that target language to, say, German, I'll get the correct translation. Now, before I move on to new stuff, let me add a new field on our view that will display the translated text once I've translated it. And since this will be updated by the Translation API, I'll need a state property variable for that. And then below the text field, I'm going to create a text view to display that string. Now I'll just comment out the existing function here for reference and type it in again. And there are a number of different overloads for this, and many include an anchor and an arrow edge. And this is because when it's presented on an iPad, it gets presented as a popover. So the one that I want for the iPhone is just the one that includes the replacement action along with the isPresented and text properties. The isPresented, again, is bound to the same property as is the text with the same source text. The action will give me a closure that'll provide us with the translated text, which I can simply call translated text. And then I can assign this translated text to the translated text of the view, so we must use self.translated_text in that case. And if you're into shorthanded notation, this can be simplified simply by removing the translated text in and replacing the assignment to just translated text to be the $0. Now when we enter some text and tap in the translate button, there's a new option, and that is replace with translation. If you tap that button, the sheet dismisses and our translated view has the new content. As I said, this is not new. This year, however, we can do more. For example, what if I wanted to determine the target language ahead of time? And then all I'll have to do is to enter some text, select the language of choice, and then tap the button and have it translated without presenting that sheet. Well, this is what we'll do next. This year at WWDC, we were introduced to a translation session, a class that performs translations between a pair of languages. This is the new API we're going to use to determine first what target language we want to use for our translation before we ask it to translate. You can see this view is very similar to the previous one with the text field and a translate button, but I also have a text field to display the translated text and an additional button that we can use to speak the translated text. All of this is going to be done without having to present that translation sheet. So to do this, I'm first going to have to create a translation service as an observable object so that we can use it for not only this view, but for the next one, as I'll be injecting an instance of that class into the environment. So I'm going to create a file called TranslationService, and I'll import translation. Then I can create a class of the same name and annotate it with the observable macro. In this class, I want to create a property for translated text, and this will update the text view in our view after processing. When I create an instance of the class, I also want to find out what languages are available to pick from for our target language and allow us to pick from one of them. I have a model structure called AvailableLanguage that I got from Apple's sample application that I can use, and it's included in the starter project. In this struct, I have a single stored property called locale that is a local language, and it conforms to the identifiable protocol, so that's why we have the ID property. In addition, there are two functions that give us a localized name and a short name, And this will give us the name and language code that we can see when we pick our language from the picker that we'll create. So back in our translation service, I'll create an array of these objects, but initialize it as an empty array and populate it when I initialize this class. So now let's create a function called getSupportedLanguages that we can call in the initializer. And this function will use a new language ability class that has a function asynchronous property that will provide us with an array of supported languages. And since this will be updating the UI, I'll need to make sure that it's executed on the main thread. So we'll need a task that executes on the main actor. Next, we can create a constant called selectedLanguages that will be the result of calling an instance of the language availability class's supported languages property. And this is an array of local language. We'll need to map this into our available language struct. And then for convenience, we'll apply the sorted method. Now we can create an initializer, and then in the initializer, we'll simply call this function to populate that array. So I'm going to want to inject this class into our environment so that when it gets initialized, it will have that array of languages when we present our views. So in the app starting point where @main is, we'll create an instance to the translation service and then inject it into the environment so all of our tabs will have access to it. So in the second flexible translation view, I'll access the class from the environment as an environment variable. And then to stop the preview from complaining or crashing, I'll need to inject a new instance into the environment there too. And then because we're going to be using the translated text from our translation service, I'll change the text view to display that version instead. Well, the picker is going to allow us to choose a language. And so we'll need a picker to be bound to a state property that is going to be a target language. So I'm going to create one that I'll just call target language. And it's going to be a locale.language. And I can specify the language code being ENG. The script will be nil. And the region will be US for me. You can choose whatever. Now I can create a picker that will display all of the available languages, and the selection will update the state property. So we'll create a picker with the label target language, and then a selection bound to our target language property. Then we can use a for each loop on the translation service's available languages, and that'll give us a language as an iterator. And then we can present a text view using the localized name function to return the string. But the selection must be assigned a language locale, so we'll need to use a tag and tag it to the language locale property. In the preview now, we have that picker, so we could choose a target language if we wanted to. Now we have to learn how to perform the translation. And this requires the creation of a translation session configuration object. And it's going to be nil until we need it, so we can create this as an optional state property. First though, we'll need to import translation. So we'll create that configuration as an optional translation session .configuration. Now a translation is triggered every time we set the configuration. And in this configuration, I can set the target language and use it until the language is changed. And if that's the case, I'll need to invalidate the current one. So I'm going to create a function called triggerTranslation. Then if the configuration is nil, we'll create a new configuration using the target language. Well, we could also pass in a source language, but we're going to let the service itself determine what the language the source text is. And as we saw working in the last example, it does a pretty good job. Else, we'll invalidate the current one. And then we can call this function in the action for our translate button. Next, we can use this configuration to request a translation. And this is done by way of a translation task that we can attach to our view. So I'll attach mine to the text view here. Well, this translation task requires a configuration, which we have, and will provide us with a session that we can use to translate the text and update our translated text property. Well, that property is in our translation service, so we should create the function there. So I'm going to create a function called translate that will receive the text to be translated along with the session, which is a translation session, and it's asynchronous and it can throw an error. We can get a response by trying and awaiting for the response for the session's translate function, passing in that text. And that response has two properties, the source text and the target text. Well, what we'll want to do is to assign the target text to our translated text variable. And then if there's an error, it'll be thrown up to the view where we call it. Back in our flexible translation view, then, we can call that function in a do catch block. We'll try and await the call to the translation service's translate function, passing in our text to translate using the session. And if there's an error, we'll set the translated text to an empty string. And then I'll handle the error just by printing out the error's localized description to the console. Now, an error will occur if the translation's not possible, like if there's not a translation possible between two chosen languages, or if you're trying to translate from one language to the same language. Oops, looks like I put this trigger translation button in the wrong location. It should be in the action for the translate button. So to test this, we'll have to run the application on a real device with iOS 18 or later installed. And this is because the translation is going to be done on device using the languages that you have stored on your device. So let me run the app on my development iPhone 11. Let me type in French for hello, bonjour. And then I'll tap on the translate button. It successfully translates to hello. And this is because I must have French already downloaded. So if you want to check to see which languages you have already on your device, you can go to the Settings app and then look for the actual Apple Translate app that comes with your phone. You can open it up and then tap on the downloaded languages. You can see here on my development iPhone, I have both of the English versions for US and UK, and I have French installed. So let's go back to our application now. So what if I entered hola, which is Spanish for hello? This time, when I tap the translate button, a modal appears telling me that I need Spanish and English. And since I don't have Spanish, I can download it now. Now, it'll take a while to download, but as soon as it does, that window is going to dismiss and the translation will appear. And from then on, I can choose either French or Spanish text and have it translated to English. If I try to change the picker now and translate to a different language, it'll fail because the configuration is still set to the one initialized as English. So let's go back to our code then and attach an onChange modifier to our picker to observe changes on our target language. If the new value is not equal to the old value, then we'll need to invalidate the current configuration. Then we'll need to create a new one with the new target language. Pretty straightforward. And if I option click on configuration, I can see that its type is an optional translation.configuration. So I can assign that new value to this configuration by creating a new instance of that class. All we'll need to do is just specify the target language because I'm letting the phone determine the source language. And that's actually what Apple's recommendation is. Our target language is the one that we get from our picker. Well, let's test now again by running on the device. But before I enter any text, I'm going to choose one of our languages that I've downloaded. So let me choose Spanish because I know I have that now. Oops, not Thai, Spanish. Well, I can enter an English string this time. So let me say, hello, how are you? And then when I tap on translate, it gets translated. Perfect. Without changing the text to be translated, I could choose another language. Let me choose one that I don't have. How about German? This time I get prompted to download it. And then when it's completed, as before, it will display the translation directly in my view. Now you can enter text from any one of the 20 plus recognized languages and translate from one to another. Well, there's one last thing I want to do. I know it's a long video, but stick with me if you're interested. And I want to enable text-to-speech on my translated text. I already have a button here, and it's really quite simple to implement. We'll need to import AV Foundation. In our action for the speech-to-text, we'll need to first create an instance of an utterance, and this is an AV speech utterance type, passing in the translation service's translated text as the string, and that's what it's going to speak. Now, if you want the voice to be the same language accent as the target language, we'll specify the utterance's voice as being an AV speech synthesizer voice, where the language is the same as the target language's language code debug description. And then we can create an instance of the AV speech synthesizer and then call the speak function, passing in that utterance. That's it. Now here's something I missed though. This translated text property is the local one on our view, and we'll want this to be the one from our service. So let me change that here. And I can remove that local one. So we can test this on a device once more, and I'm going to enter some text in my case. I'm going to choose a different language because I can change languages ahead of time. So let me choose German. I know I've got it installed. Now, I didn't need to tap the translate button because the configuration was made invalid and then new again when that language changed, so it displays the translated text right away. And then I can tap the speech to text button. And the first time you'll do this, it'll take a bit to load, and then it'll read the translated text in the accent of that language.
Hallo, wie geht es dir heute?
So let me choose another language that I've downloaded, like Spanish. Now when it's translated, I can tap on the text speech button and it gets spoken with a Spanish accent.
Hola, ¿cómo estás hoy?
Well, that's it for this video. So I hope that you've learned something new here that you can use in your projects going forward. And I hope you join me in the second video in this series, where we'll complete the project as I outlined at the beginning, and a link to that video will be in the description. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment below. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and enable notifications so that you're made aware of new videos that I release. And you can also download my free channel listing app to be able to search for and find content from any one of my over 300 Swift and SwiftUI related videos. Hope to see you in the next one. Thank you.